Welcome to all of you to the webinar series hosted by Advocates Association Bengaluru. We have with us today Mr. Shailesh Madiyal, Advocate on Record, Supreme Court of India. Mr. Shailesh, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Vikram. My pleasure.
Great pleasure. Now, I would like to introduce our today's speaker. Mr. Shailesh is an alumni of University Law College, Bengaluru. He enrolled as an advocate in the year 2002 and joined the chambers of Honorable Mr. Justice Ashok B. Hinchagiri. He then moved to Delhi and in 2010 became an advocate on record in the Supreme Court of India. He is presently practicing before the Supreme Court, Honorable Delhi High Court and various tribunals. Shailesh has appeared in large number of cases involving diverse subjects. He is fond of writing and writes on various social and legal issues in newspapers and other publications. So Shailesh, on behalf of Advocates Association Bengaluru, I extend a warm welcome to you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vikram. Can you hear me? Am I clear?
Yes, you are audible. Yes.
First of all, my congratulations to the Advocates Association for, this must be one of the few associations which is taking such a proactive role throughout this lockdown in hosting these webinars very regularly. So I hope everyone's healthy and keeping well, and I'll just get down to the topic straight away. The topic is wrongful arrest and prosecution. Wrongful arrest and prosecution and the right to compensation arising out of this wrongful arrest and prosecution. Just to introduce the subject, one of the most cherished freedoms of any human being is the right to liberty, enshrined in Article 21 and supported by Article 22 of the Constitution of India. The right to liberty can necessarily be restricted in accordance with law, and perhaps nothing threatens an individual's liberty more than an arrest or a threat of arrest or incarceration. The power of arrest in the state and state's authorities is a necessary one. It's an essential sovereign function. And sometimes it could also be the responsibility of the state to arrest an individual. However, this power brings with it a threat, and this threat manifests itself in three facets. The first facet is wrongful arrest and detention. That is one. Second, wrongful prosecution, which may be accompanied by arrest or may be or may be separate from an arrest in the sense that there may not be arrest during prosecution, during the course of prosecution. The third is wrongful conviction, which may thereafter be set aside in appeal, but which necessarily would bring with it, since there has been a conviction in the first place, which would bring with it the possibility of arrest. So let us just examine this in the Indian context. It is not unknown in India, as in several other countries, that complaints are filed and FIRs are registered to intimidate people against whom the complainant may have an axe to grind. It is also not unknown that an overzealous enforcement agency, either on account of misplaced notions or on account of malafides, rush to arrest persons and charge them without sufficient evidence. It is also not uncommon that persons are convicted and after several years that conviction may be set aside by an appellate court. In fact, this is a topic very close to my heart in the sense that I feel very strongly that the media and the enforcement agencies are rushing to call for arrests as soon as a case is registered. And ironically, very often the sufferers of this are people in important positions or places. So as soon as a case is registered, everyone's crying for blood. And just because the enforcement agency, whether it is the police or any other enforcement agency, does not immediately arrest a person, people think of it as a lack of competence or a lack of will of the enforcement agency. I think that needs to change. And in fact, in the judgment, Sube Singh's judgment, which is reported in 2006, I'll come back to the judgment in detail later. But in 2006, the Supreme Court recognizes that there seems to be a perception amongst the police and amongst the common man that the first duty of the police officer is to arrest as soon as a serious offense is reported. This problem has been further accentuated by the Supreme Court's judgment in Lalita Kumari's case, because what happened in Lalita Kumari's case, as you must know, is that the Supreme Court said that the police authorities should not enter into carrying out a preliminary inquiry before registering an FIR, save in exceptional cases like matrimonial cases. But otherwise, the police authorities must not enter into the domain of carrying out a preliminary inquiry. So the minute a cognizable offense is either reported or information is received, the police must register the FIR. Now, per se, nothing wrong can be found with this proposition, because as a complainant, I have a right that the proceedings start. However, the intimidatory value that is associated with the registration of FIR is largely on account of the following reasons. Now, as I said, as soon as a person goes, gives a complaint, the police registers an FIR. It might name the person accused, whoever the complaint is given against, without a shred of evidence. Unfortunately, the consequence of this is that the enforcement agencies are quick on the gun to seek an arrest even before adequate evidence is available. A catalyst in this process is the fact that the media and most people view arrest or immediate arrest as a sign of justice having been done. People often feel that the minute FIR is registered, a person is arrested, punishment has been meted out to him. And conversely, if an arrest does not happen prior to conviction, people feel that justice has not been done. Secondly, the problem arises because, notwithstanding the general rule that bail and not jail is the proposition to be followed, courts are not normally very liberal in the grant of bail, especially when the offense alleged is serious. Third, even in the absence of an arrest, once an FIR is registered, the process of going through the investigation process and the trial are considered extremely humiliating, stressful, and long-winded for the common man. In fact, your neighbor would start looking at you suspiciously the minute an FIR is registered, without understanding that that is just the initiation of the entire process and does not really underline your guilt in any manner. Fourthly, even if a person were to be finally acquitted or prior to acquittal itself discharged, the entire process is so lengthy that the accused person would have spent considerable time in imprisonment, and even if he has not been imprisoned or taken in custody, the trial process itself would have taken a very large toll emotionally, socially, and financially on him. So it is in this backdrop I wanted to discuss the doctrine of compensation for wrongful arrest or wrongful prosecution, and even sometimes wrongful conviction in the Indian context. Now, during the course of this paper, as I would proceed further, I would argue that the existing mechanism for compensating in the case of wrongful prosecution in India is extremely illusory and insufficient. And there is a need for a structured and efficient mechanism to compensate, which is fast, which is efficient, and does not place a burden on the person who has been wrongly prosecuted or wrongly convicted, or perhaps accompanied by the two, wrongly imprisoned as well. It is my view that compensation should be provided not only to an individual who has been wrongly prosecuted as a result of malafides or mistakes of the state or its instrumentalities, but even in a case where a person may have been prosecuted for the right reasons. The prosecuting agency or the state might have had reason to believe that they should prosecute the person. He has been taken in custody, but finally, if he has been acquitted, my view is even then, there requires to be some amount of compensation purely because of the doctrine that a person is innocent until proven guilty. So To start off, let us just first look at the legal framework as it exists today in India, and then we'll look at some of the judgments that are there in this field. The legal framework in India is I mean, essentially, in fact, to go back a little bit, in 1968, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, to which India is a signatory and India has ratified, the ICCPR, in two of its articles, Article 14 and Article 9, says that if a person has been convicted and if that conviction has been reversed or pardoned on the ground that the conviction itself was based on a miscarriage of justice, then the person who has been convicted should be compensated in accordance with law. So it requires countries to have a law which provides for such compensation. Similarly, Article 9 has something similar. I won't go very deep into the ICCPR because that's not really something we are immediately concerned with. I am just bringing to everyone's notice that there is an international obligation to provide a rule like this. So therefore, under the ICCPR itself, if states are required to provide a law that if the following three conditions are satisfied, then a person should be compensated. First, he should have been convicted. Second, the conviction should be reversed on the basis that the conviction is on account of a miscarriage of justice. And third is if there has been an unlawful arrest or detention. Now, just do note the difference between an unlawful arrest as opposed to an unnecessary arrest or detention, because my view is that an arrest may not necessarily be unlawful, but if it is unnecessary and the person has had to remain in custody and has thereafter been acquitted, then he should be compensated, because rightly or wrongly he has lost his liberty on account of the state's action. So in my view, the obligations that India has as a signatory to the ICCPR are wholly insufficient in the Indian context. And even those obligations are not reflected in the Indian statutory framework. In fact, I should just tell everyone that the Delhi High Court, Justice Muralidhar, I think, in the Delhi High Court, he was dealing with a case involving a subsequent acquittal in the case of Bablu Chauhan versus State of Delhi. And there Justice Muralidhar did notice, he said that, look, you may be entitled to remedy under civil law by filing a civil suit for compensation under tort, but there is no statutory framework. And therefore he recommended to the Law Commission to study this and produce a report. The Law Commission has given a report, which I will come to later, which again, I think the recommendations there are also insufficient. I'll come to that later, but just to highlight the point that this did attract the attention of the Delhi High Court, the fact that there is an insufficient statutory framework as on date. But anyway, so let us first look at, insufficient or otherwise, let us look at what actually exists today. The law on the remedies available to a person who has been wrongly prosecuted or wrongly convicted or wrongly detained can be divided broadly into three heads. The first is under criminal law. The second is under civil law. And the third, which in my view has been the most used, is under public law. That is the constitutional courts, the High Court and the Supreme Court have granted compensation, saying that it is independent of any other remedy. So in criminal law, let us look at what a person can do. First, Section 250 of the CRPC provides for compensation for an accused for an accusation made without reasonable cause. And to put it very broadly, what it says is that the magistrate may, by whom the case is heard, if he decides to discharge or acquit all or any of the accused, and if he was of the opinion that there was no reasonable cause to make the accusation in the first place, he can issue notice to the complainant, the person who made the accusation, and ask him to show cause why he should not pay compensation to the accused. Now, this is insufficient for the reason that this is not compensation claimed against the state. This is compensation which a person, after he is either discharged or acquitted, can claim against a person making the accusation in the first place. So it will necessarily enjoin an entire process, a litigation process at the end of the process which the accused person has already undergone. So this really is insufficient, and it is not directed at compensation to be given by the state or enforcement agency. The second provision is that under section 357 capital A, read with 2WA of the CRPC, which is a victims compensation scheme. And here, what the CRPC requires is that every state government must have a scheme to compensate the victim of a crime. So again, I mean, this again is illusory, because if someone were to claim compensation in terms of a scheme framed under 357 capital A, then after his acquittal, he first needs to be acquitted. He then needs to claim as a victim first, then he needs to establish that the person giving the complaint or the prosecution had committed an illegality and that he is the victim of that crime, and then claim compensation. So this again is really going to help anybody in claiming compensation. The third section is section 358. The heading to this is compensation to persons groundlessly arrested. So this is where the statutory law comes closest to granting compensation, or for providing for compensation to a person who has been arrested without sufficient ground. And if I am to just read out briefly what section 358 provides for, is that 358 says that whenever any person causes a police officer, so this is important to understand, it is again directed against a person who causes a police officer to carry out an arrest. So if I am to give a complaint against X, and it is a patently false complaint, and X comes to be arrested, then proceedings may lie against me in a claim for compensation. This again is not a provision where the person arrested can move and claim against the state for compensation. So these are the three provisions that I came across under the criminal statutory law in India. And as I said earlier, these, according to me, are wholly insufficient for at least three reasons. One, it does not appear to be directed against the state at all, or does not require the state to pay compensation. And we must understand that whoever may give a complaint, finally it is the state, except in private complaints, finally it is the state which is the prosecuting agency, or instrumentalities of state are the prosecuting agency, or the court which is convicting. So therefore, this is a serious lacuna, according to me, that none of these provisions require the state to compensate. One. Second, the second reason why I think that these remedies are not efficacious at all is because in India, it would be an extremely long-winded process, since first of all, the person making the accusation has to be proceeded against. He has to be then convicted or discharged. And thereafter, if he has been discharged or acquitted, he will then institute fresh proceedings as in a claim for compensation. So that's as far as the criminal law statutory framework is concerned. The next question is, in civil law, what does a person do? As most of you would be aware, that the only remedy available to a person in civil law would be to file a civil suit on the basis of a claim for compensation on account of a tort. Now, again, this is not really efficacious for two reasons. One, the process of fighting a civil suit would be lengthy. Please bear in mind that the person who would be filing a civil suit in a situation like this has already gone through the entire process of criminal prosecution or maybe even trial. So it's very unlikely that he would have the energy then to go and file a civil suit. So the first remedy is, the only remedy is to file a civil suit, which would be lengthy. It would have its own cost implication. And the person would then end up, with several more years of fighting the civil suit, one. And second, compensation granted in torts in India is generally low. So he's not likely to get anything substantial to compensate for the loss of his liberty or his wrongful incarceration for any substantial period of time. It is the third remedy, which is as a public law remedy, which has been used the most in India to grant compensation. What do I mean by public law remedy? I mean that courts, especially the Supreme Court and the High Court, have in their writ jurisdiction, or the Supreme Court in its inherent jurisdiction, they have said that if a person has been wrongly imprisoned or tortured in custody, or there has been a wrongful compensation, in some cases, they have said that it is an offense or it is a wrong committed against the public at large. It is not only against an individual, it is a wrong committed against the public at large. And therefore, independent of whatever may be a person's claim in a civil suit, he would still be entitled, in some cases, again, this is not an absolute rule, he would be entitled to compensation. The latest in this line of judgments, at least amongst the known judgments, well-known judgments, the latest in this line is the judgment, I think, of Justice Deepak Mishra in the Nambi Narayanan ISRO case. I'll come back to this public law remedy as I deal with every case, different cases that have been decided by various courts, including the Karnataka High Court. But this is what I mean generally when I say public remedy, public law remedy. It is the remedy given by constitutional courts in their writ jurisdiction by providing compensation. So as I will, I will deal with public law remedy later. But before I do that, let me just bring to everybody's attention that the Law Commission of India, as I had said earlier, the Delhi High Court noticed that there is no statutory framework in India and therefore referred the issue to the Law Commission to study the matter. After this judgment, after this reference, the Law Commission produced what is the 277th report dealing with this very issue and made several recommendations, which again I think are wholly insufficient to provide remedies in the context in India where trials go on for so long, where prosecutions itself or the investigative process itself may go on for pretty long. So to put it in a nutshell, what the Law Commission said is, first, the Law Commission said that compensation must be given to any person who has been wrongfully or maliciously prosecuted, irrespective of whether it leads to his conviction or detention. You may just note the words maliciously prosecuted. I'll come back to why I'm stressing on that. So first of all, compensation should be given to a person who's wrongfully or maliciously prosecuted. Second, what the Law Commission recommended was that the Code of Criminal Procedure should include guiding principles to be followed by the court while deciding the amount of compensation. And the factors, some of the factors the Law Commission said, which ought to be taken into consideration, should include the seriousness of the offense that the individual has been prosecuted for, the severity of the punishment, That would, of course, apply in cases where there has been a conviction which has been set aside subsequently. So the severity of the punishment. Third, the length of detention, which he has undergone either during the process of investigation or post-conviction. Harm to reputation of the individual, or the loss of opportunity. These are just some of the indicative factors which the Law Commission talked about to take into consideration as a recommendation to take into consideration while granting compensation. The third thing which the Law Commission recommended was that in addition, this is very important, in addition to pecuniary liability, what must also be looked at is the kind of assistance of a non-pecuniary nature, such as say counseling or skill development, that the state must provide to a person who has been wrongfully prosecuted or wrongfully convicted. These are some of the important recommendations which the Law Commission made. Now, why do I say that it is insufficient? Even if these recommendations were to be accepted in toto, why do I say it is insufficient? I say it is insufficient because look at the threshold. The threshold that the Law Commission provides for is that there should be a miscarriage of justice. It is not enough if a person has been accused, perhaps detained or arrested, perhaps convicted, and the conviction has thereafter been set aside. What the Law Commission recommends is that the arrest or the detention or the prosecution must be on account of a miscarriage of justice, and only then would the person be entitled to compensation. Now, as you all know, the threshold of miscarriage of justice is very high. It would be very difficult for a person, after having been prosecuted and either having been discharged or having been convicted and his conviction having been set aside in appeal or having been acquitted in the first place, it is very difficult for him then to establish in a fresh proceeding that there has been a miscarriage of justice. I'll just give an example. The Law Commission, in fact, it set out a draft amendment for consideration by the Parliament. Now, draft amendment to the CRPC to take care of this issue. And what does it say? I'll just read out 2-3 things. What does it say is wrongful prosecution, for example? It says wrongful prosecution would be if the prosecuting agency makes or fabricates a false or incorrect record. That is one. Second, if it makes a false declaration or statement before, rather the complainant or any individual makes a false declaration or statement before an officer authorized by law. So, these are the kind of things which the Law Commission recommends would qualify a person to then claim compensation. So, my submission is that the threshold for this is very high. It would become impossible, next to impossible for a person to claim compensation on this basis, because he would need to prove these things all after having been acquitted or discharged. So that is as far as what the Law Commission recommended. Now briefly, now that I have dealt with what the Law Commission has recommended and what the existing mechanism in India is, let me just briefly deal with what internationally in 2 or 3 countries, what is the legal system over there. I'll just quickly do it because it's not something that would help us in our day-to-day functioning in the courts. But just as a comparison, in the United Kingdom, first of all, the United Kingdom, this aspect of compensation for wrongful prosecution or wrongful conviction is dealt with by the Criminal Justice Act of 1988. Now, in the Criminal Justice Act, this is very interesting. Initially, the act provided for compensation to a person who has suffered punishment as a result of wrongful conviction, which has been subsequently reversed or pardoned on the ground that there has been a miscarriage of justice. This is very similar to what our Law Commission has recommended. So, if you look at the text of the law as it exists in England, in the United Kingdom, the person has to be wrongfully convicted It will not apply to a person who has been prosecuted and discharged or acquitted. He has to have been convicted. That conviction should have been set aside in appeal or reversed or pardoned. And that setting aside has to be on the ground that there has been miscarriage of justice. Now, this issue came up in a case in England very recently, relatively recently rather, in 2011. And what the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom said is that miscarriage of justice cannot determine the notion of innocence. So what the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom said is that if it can be conclusively shown that the state was not, whether or not there has been a miscarriage of justice or whether or not the conviction was on account of a miscarriage of justice, if it can be conclusively shown that the state was not entitled to punish a person, then he should be entitled to compensation for having been punished. So this judgment subsequently lowered the bar from what existed in the text of the statute. Similarly, if we look at Germany, Germany also has something similar, except that in Germany, conviction is not necessary to claim compensation. In Germany, even if a person has been remanded to custody, and that remand is found to be irregular or not warranted, then he is entitled to compensation. He can claim compensation. And in all of these countries, I must also tell you, in all of these countries, the statute is very clear. It even prescribes what the maximum and the minimum that can be claimed by the person claiming is. So that would substantially reduce the amount of time spent in litigating this claim for compensation itself. United States of America has something similar. In the United States of America, the federal law provides that a claimant is eligible for compensation, a fixed sum, depending on the duration of his detention and the nature of offense, on the ground of pardon of innocence or reversal of conviction. Here again in the US, like in England, there needs to be a reversal of the conviction. So unless the conviction happens, the person cannot claim compensation at all. A conviction has to happen. That conviction has to be set aside on the given grounds, which would give a person the right to claim compensation. This is in England. Similarly, there are similar laws in Canada as well. But let me now come to India and the public law remedies and the judgments of the court from time to time in dealing with cases of either wrongful prosecution, wrongful conviction, or wrongful detention. Now, do bear in mind, as I take you through, I'll just share a short list of the judgments. Do bear in mind, as I take you through these judgments, that none of these judgments are based on statutory law or on tort. The compensation here is based on the Constitutional Court acting in its writ jurisdiction, feeling or coming to the conclusion that the person ought to be remedied for the loss suffered by him on account of his on account of either his detention or prosecution or conviction. Also, as I go through some of the judgments, you would notice the vagueness with which the issue has been treated. So it comes down to what the court at the time feels. And that is the reason the Delhi High Court expressed its dissatisfaction that there is no statutory law. Because if there is a statutory law, then the accused person knows, the person who has suffered the illegality or the wrongful conviction or detention knows the basis of making his claim. After all, even today, if, for example, we file a 482 petition, it's not in the usual course that we make a claim for compensation. It may happen, it may not happen. On the other hand, if there is a statutory framework, we would know exactly what is to be done. And that will become very clear from these judgments, which I would be taking you through. I'll if I may just take you through the list itself, is the PPT that I have prepared on the screen? Yeah. So the first judgment which I will be dealing with is that of Khatri and others versus the state of Bihar and others. This is a judgment arising out of the famous, or rather the infamous Bhagalpur blindings, which is reflected in the movie Gangajal, which a lot of you may have seen. Ajay Devgan has acted in it. Prisoners were blinded while they were in police custody in this case. And the court, this is the citation as you can see on the screen, is 1981 1 SCC 627. Two things stand out in this case. The first, if you look at para 8 of this judgment, as and when you have time, you may look at it. It says that we cannot help expressing our unhappiness at the lack of concern shown by the judicial magistrate in not inquiring into the blinded prisoners. So it cast a duty even on the magistrate to take a look at the illegalities that have been committed. Why I say this is important is that a question may arise that is it only the responsibility of the prosecuting agency and the police, or does some responsibility lie on the magistrate as well, or the courts as well, which may have either had a chance to deal with it when the accused was brought before it, or which may have convicted the accused wrongfully in the event of it, a wrongful conviction. So here the Supreme Court does touch upon this issue, and then the court at para 4 deals with this question. The question was raised by the advocate who appeared for the blinded persons, that the court ought to determine a compensation. The question was raised as to whether in dealing with a petition of this nature, the court can grant compensation in addition or only provide for the welfare of these individuals. So although the question was raised, the court did not actually get into compensation, but instead what the court did do is it directed the state to meet the expenses of these individuals who had been blinded at a blind home in Delhi. So it stopped short. The question was raised, but the court stopped short of actually granting compensation or monetary compensation. Thereafter came the case of Veena Sethi versus the state of Bihar. Do look at the way jurisprudence developed in granting compensation. Thereafter came the case of Veena Sethi versus the state of Bihar. Now this was a case where individuals were illegally detained for years together. And here the court initially said, in fact the reported judgment simply says that the question of compensation would be determined at a later date, on a later date. The reported judgment is 1982 2 SCC 583. But if one were to look at literature on this issue, unfortunately I couldn't locate the reported judgment where compensation was actually finally granted. But if you look at the literature on this, it appears that initially the court said we'll look at how much compensation is to be granted, and thereafter the court actually went ahead and granted compensation for the illegal detention of certain prisoners. After this came the very important judgment of Rudal Shah versus the state of Bihar. Now, in Rudal Shah, also a claim for compensation. Again, this was all in either the in the jurisdiction of either the High Court or the Supreme Court where this issue first came up. But the judgment that I'm finally reading out, going through, is that of the Supreme Court. Now here, when the issue of compensation came up, the state took a defense that, look, he has a remedy under civil law. He can file a suit for damages. And if he so does, the question of claim of compensation can be decided over there. The court said that and the relevant paras, if you would like to note, are para 9 and para 12 of this judgment. The court said that it is true, and I'm quoting now, it is true that Article 32 cannot be used as a substitute for the enforcement of rights and obligations which can be enforced efficaciously through an ordinary process of courts, civil and criminal. But then went on to say that in a case where the illegality committed by the state in detaining an individual is patent and obvious on the face of it, then the fact that a civil suit can either be filed or is even pending would not come in the way of granting damages or granting compensation. And the compensation granted under the writ proceedings would be independent of a claim that the individual may make before a civil court. Similar was the law laid down in Bhim Singh versus the state of J&K. I don't need to take you through that because it was very similar in the proposition laid down. But just to come back for a minute, if you would allow me, in Rudal Shah's case, the court, that is where the concept of remedy under public law came in. The court said there may be a remedy under civil law, there may be a remedy under criminal law, but those may not be efficacious and therefore granted compensation under what it termed as public law. It said that the detention, illegal detention of this nature is against the public of the country and therefore compensation was granted. Then came Rini Johar versus State of MP. The citation is provided in the PowerPoint presentation that I have shared on screen. If you would want to take a look at it. Then I come to the very important judgment that I referred to right at the beginning, which is Bablu Chauhan alias Dablu versus the State of Delhi. Now, as you noticed, even in the earlier cases where claims for compensation were being considered by either the High Court or the Supreme Court, the court was faced with this argument that, look, there is a civil law. He can file a civil suit. It would be a claim for money, finally. In Bablu Chauhan's case, the High Court made some observations which I think are extremely relevant. It did not really lay down the law, but it made an observation. And I'll just again read out from that because it's put in very beautiful words in the judgment itself. It says, the third issue concerns the possible legal remedies for victims of wrongful incarceration and malicious prosecution in India. It then refers to a report and the laws and the practices in different countries, and then says, as far as India is concerned, there is no exclusive legislation on the topic. This is what I was trying to point out earlier also, that there is no legislation or statutory framework for this purpose. The decisions in Khatri versus State of Bihar, which is the Bhagalpur case, Veena Sethi versus State of Bihar, Rudal Shah versus State of Bihar, Bhim Singh versus State of Jammu and Kashmir, and Santbir versus State of Bihar are instances where the Supreme Court has held that compensation can be awarded by the constitutional courts for violation of fundamental rights under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. These have included instances of compensation being awarded to those wrongly incarcerated as well. But these are episodic. Now, you may just note this, but these are episodic and are not necessarily available to all similarly situated persons. There is, at present, in our country, no statutory or legal scheme for compensating those who are wrongfully incarcerated. The instances of those being acquitted by the High Court or the Supreme Court after many years of imprisonment are not infrequent. They are left to their own devices without any hope of reintegration into society. Now, this is very notable for more than one reason. One, some amount of blame is indicated from this these observations, it is indicative that the court was of the view that some amount of blame may, in the sense that for a conviction which is subsequently set aside, may also lie on the court, because it says somebody is convicted and subsequently acquitted, he also perhaps would be entitled to compensation. And the conviction would obviously happen by a court. It is also important for the reason that the court says that the civil remedy that is available, that is filing a suit for tort, is not good enough, and there must be a specific statutory framework. I'll straight away now come to the next judgment, and it's a Karnataka High Court judgment, which I found very interesting. Perhaps you would have come across other judgments of a similar nature, but I found this, and I found it, in fact, this judgment has been challenged in the Supreme Court, and notice has been issued, it has not been stayed. This is the judgment of Jaikant S versus the state. Now here, the magistrate permitted the remand of an individual. That was challenged before the High Court in a criminal petition. Before the High Court, in fact, what the High Court says is that after the judgment in Arnesh Kumar's case, the Supreme Court's judgment in Arnesh Kumar's case, the magistrate has failed in his duties, or at least prima facie failed in his duty. He should not have allowed the arrest of the individual concerned, and in addition to directing compensation to be paid by the state to be recovered by the police officer, the High Court also directed the Registrar General to take necessary action for initiation of departmental inquiry against the magistrate who passed the order granting custody of the accused person. In fact, this departmental inquiry issue is dealt with in Arnesh Kumar's case as well, and the specific direction of the court is that whoever, if a magistrate allows custody contrary to the direction given in that judgment, then departmental proceedings are to be initiated against him. The last judgment that I would deal with, which actually went ahead and granted compensation, is the relatively recent judgment of Nambi Narayanan versus C.B. Matthews. This was a 3-judge bench. You would recall the famous ISRO spy case many years back, where a case was registered, and on the basis of information given, a very famous scientist came to be arrested by the Kerala police. A petition was filed before the High Court seeking proceedings against the officers concerned by the scientist himself, by the individual. That moved all the way up till the Supreme Court. And when it came to the Supreme Court, a bench headed by Justice Deepak Mishra, a 3-judge bench, it said 2 things. One, it said that this individual has been arrested during the process of investigation for a few days. If I recall right, it was just about 15 or 20 days. It was not a very long period. But it went ahead to say that he is entitled to compensation. The compensation ought to be paid by the state, and then directed the setting up of a committee to inquire into or to proceed against departmentally against the officers concerned. This judgment is very important for more than one reason. Again, one is because it provided compensation. It specifically referred to the term public law remedy. It specifically once again reiterated what was held earlier, that this will be in addition to the remedy available under civil law, and then went ahead to grant compensation. And it also said that incarcerating or arresting a person unnecessarily would be in a form torture. You don't necessarily need to physically torture the individual, but that arrest itself might amount to torture. Now we have looked at the judgments where compensation was granted, and you may wonder that if compensation has been granted in so many cases, then why do we need a separate framework? My submission to you is that a separate framework is required exactly for the reason that it is only under writ jurisdiction that this compensation is being given. It is not as if somebody has approached the court specifically seeking compensation, started from the trial before the trial court. Not all criminal cases, after all, finally reach the High Court or the Supreme Court. And as I had pointed out, the Supreme Court had held, or rather the High Court said, it is episodic. In some cases it is granted, some cases it is not granted. And a very good example of that, of how episodic it actually is the judgment or an order passed by the Supreme Court in the case of Adam Bhai Suleiman Bhai Ajmeri versus State of Gujarat, which is 2014, 7 SCC 716. Now in this case, the court acquitted all the accused. So in the citation that you see on the screen, you will only find that the court acquitted all the accused. But not only did it acquit the accused, what it said at para 225 is that there is a serious fault on the part of the investigating agency in even prosecuting or investigating and subsequently prosecuting these individuals. So this typically would have been a perfect case to grant compensation. But after the acquittal, an application appears to have been filed before the very same court, before the Supreme Court, asking for compensation, saying that, look, the prosecution was bad, detention has been suffered, so compensate me. When that application was filed, that application seems to have been withdrawn. And although the order of withdrawal does not reflect it, if you look at the Law Commission's report, it refers to a news report. The Law Commission refers to a news report where it said that when an application for compensation was filed, the court said that it is not in every case. I mean, these were the oral exchanges in the court according to the Law Commission's report. It is not in every case where there is an acquittal that compensation should be granted. And if compensation is to be granted in every case where there is an acquittal, then it would open a Pandora's box. And in this case, the court was not inclined to grant compensation. Therefore, the application came to be withdrawn. So you can see that how diverse two courts have been in fairly identical circumstances while determining whether compensation should be granted or not. Similarly, since I'm running short of time, I think, because I was given an hour, similarly, the next judgment is Sube Singh versus State of Haryana. Here, the court, in fact, observed what I had said earlier. The court observed that the people also should not, it's not just the police, but people also should not have this perception that as soon as an FIR is registered, the police have to go and arrest the person. Arrest is not the punishment. Arrest has to be carried out in exceptional circumstances. Punishment has to be by virtue of conviction, but perhaps because trials take so long, complainants, general public, media view the arrest by the police as a form of punishment. And if the police do not arrest an individual immediately, it is looked at as if the police have failed in its duties. So this was observed in this case. And this case, again, pertained to custodial violence, and compensation was not granted in this case. The last case that I am referring to is that of the state of Rajasthan versus Jainuddin Sheikh. Here the court said that yes, the person was wrongly arrested, but there was no malice in the prosecution. It was not deliberate, and therefore the individual would not be entitled to compensation. Now just look at it from this perspective. If after the entire process of undergoing an investigation or subsequent to investigation, prosecution, or even having been convicted, and therefore going through the appellate process, the person is then required to establish malice, it is very unlikely that most people would ever get into that area at all. So these are the judgments that I was referring to, and I'll quickly conclude by saying that, in my view, the very fact that private law and criminal law has not been sufficient is evidenced by the fact that the High Court and the Supreme Court have on several occasions granted compensation, not in exercise of any statutory provision in terms of civil law or criminal law, but in exercise of its constitutional jurisdiction. And therefore, I would conclude by saying, by putting forward what in my view should happen. I feel that the exercise of writ jurisdiction by the High Court and Supreme Court cannot wish away the requirement to have a specific statutory framework. The statutory framework must go beyond what the Law Commission has recommended, because the threshold of miscarriage of justice would be very high. And in fact, according to me, if a person has been arrested, and even if he has been convicted and the conviction has thereafter been set aside, irrespective of whether there has been a miscarriage of justice or irrespective of whether there was a malicious attempt to arrest him or prosecute him, the person should be entitled to compensation, something similar to a strict liability rule, because rightly or wrongly, it is the state's duty to decide whether to prosecute or not to prosecute, the state, or to arrest or not to arrest. The state having decided to arrest or to prosecute, if it has not been successful in its endeavor, it must then provide for remedial measures to the person who has suffered the consequence. This would have two consequences. One, it would, in addition, of course, to actually providing compensation and succor to the individual concerned, it would also provide some check on the state machinery from exercising its arrest powers more liberally than is required. I will end at that, and I would be happy to discuss this if anybody would like to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sailesh, for a very eloquent presentation. I request you to kindly stop the screen sharing option so that I'll be able to look at the screen and the participants as well.
Is that all right?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
Before we pitch into the Q&A session, a small clarification from my side. Could you please tell me the criminal petition number of Jaikant's case?
Jaikant's case.
If it is not handy later on, you can share.
No, it is here. 4306.
Criminal petition number 4306 of
2019. This is challenged by the magistrate, if I'm not wrong, before the Supreme Court, and notice is issued. It's not stay, notice is issued.
Right. Thank you so much. Now, can we have the first online question, please? I see Mr. Mahesh has raised his hand. I also see Mr. Mahesh Thakur raising his hand. 1 second. Before that, I am unmuting Mr. Mahesh Babu. Mr. Mahesh Babu, I have unmuted you. You may kindly pose your question. Mr. Mahesh Babu. All right, we'll go with Mr. Mahesh Thakur now. Yes, Mr. Mahesh, I have unmuted you. You may kindly pose your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that as you stated that miscarriage of justice should not be made a requirement for claiming compensation. But there are cases in which there are heinous offenders who commit heinous offenses, and they are able to subvert the process of criminal law by tampering with evidence or by influencing the witnesses, and able to secure acquittal. Now, in case this thing we don't allow, this fact that he is required to prove miscarriage of justice, then even such offenders will be able to get compensation. So that is one thing. Another thing is that what I felt by listening to the entire lecture on this topic, that the main problem is that the trial takes too much of time. So in case trial is shortened or our processes for prosecuting an accused, it takes lesser time, they are more efficient, then probably most of our difficulties will be cured. Even if you claim a compensation later on, then you are hesitant to do so because you are taking so much time in getting your complaint prosecuted first. Then you feel that for claiming compensation, I have to undergo another trial. So that prevents you from prosecuting such a complaint. And otherwise, tort law would have been sufficient, because main remedy today we have is of tort law. But we are not able to avail that remedy only because of this slow process of courts. So the question is that if miscarriage of justice is not made a factor, then everybody will start claiming compensation, even if he is a real offender and he was able to get acquittal because of some difficulties in prosecution.
So, if I can answer that, Mahesh, that's an absolutely valid point. In fact, when I was preparing this issue did crop up. When I was discussing with some of my friends also, this issue did crop up. But then look at it from the other point of view. Look, prosecuting is the state's responsibility, right? An informant gives a complaint. I mean, it provides the information. After that, whether the person is to be arrested, whether the prima facie evidence is sufficient to arrest him, whether he ought to be prosecuted, what happens in the trial, it is all the state's responsibility. Finally, if a prosecution fails, then if you go by the doctrine of innocent until proven guilty, then why why should the individual who has been prosecuted to be put to that suffering? But I take your point, and perhaps the via media, I mean, in fact, during my discussion with some of my friends, this is what I thought. Perhaps a via media could be that if a person is acquitted, the burden should shift on the state to establish that the prosecution was rightful. But to place the burden of proving miscarriage of justice on the individual concerned, that would, again, I mean, it would become very difficult for him to do that. On the second aspect, about trial taking your time, I completely agree with you. I mean, half of this problem is on account of the fact that trials take time. So a person remains in custody for or trials or even appeals take time. So a person remains in custody for very long. And if and that is the reason I felt that the law as it exists abroad of miscarriage of justice being the threshold and things, that would not, or conviction being a prerequisite, cannot apply here, because in India, even prior to conviction, a person may remain in custody for a substantial period of time.
Yeah, that's true.
So yes, I mean, if trials are faster, half these problems would be taken care of. But I still don't think a faster trial is a substitute for a statutory framework, because unless there is a statutory framework, merely filing a civil suit for a tort would be very difficult to pursue. You can at least have something like determining the minimum and maximum compensation as is there in the US, or I think in the United Kingdom as well, or the factors that are to be taken into consideration to determine compensation.
Yeah, probably because of that only tort law could not much develop in India.
Right.
And one clarification I would like to give on this Jaykant S case, because this is the SLP filed by me on behalf of the magistrate who had sent this person again. Actually, what happened in this case is, initially on an FIR, this person accused was arrested and he was sent to custody. Thereafter, when session court issued order for release, then one more FIR was filed. And in second FIR, he was sent to custody by the magistrate. So the High Court was of the view that even in the second FIR, which were similar accusations, the judge should not have allowed him to be taken into custody. The judge was of the view that since the second FIR, there was no stay by the sessions, and therefore he allowed the custody. So this was the issue.
So therefore, the bottom line is that a court cannot wash its hands off either. So
That's
when we
right.
say responsibility of the state or the sovereign, a
Yeah.
court's
So
responsibility also
the
exists.
question which arises in such cases is that if a judicial officer, by some lack of understanding or something, he commits a mistake, whether such an action should be taken against him. So that would be the question now for the Supreme Court to decide.
I take you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'll be unmuting Mr. Mahesh Babu. So Mahesh Babu, for the second time, I've given you the option to unmute. You may kindly pose your question.
Yeah.
Mr. Mahesh.
Good evening. This is already answered, I think, my question. If the accused is not arrested or detained, or if they grant bail also, he may destroy the evidence or witnesses. That's why he is arrested. That is my question, sir. So in India also, because the law is evolving, it may take some time to establish a statutory law.
I mean,
Yes, sir.
I agree with you. It wouldn't be an overnight process. The only point I tried to make is that finally, if a person, it is found that the person did not deserve to be arrested in the first place, then should he not be compensated for it? Which is why in the end I made a reference to the tort norm of no fault liability or strict liability. That all right, I mean, maybe the prosecution was not wrong, but the fact of the matter is the person has suffered. Maybe the prosecution at that point of time rightly believed that he was an offender, but if the prosecution has not been justified by the final result, then should the person not be compensated for it? So that was the that was what I was trying to hit upon.
Thank you so much. I'll be unmuting Mr. Puttige Ramesh. Yes, sir. You may ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. Trivikram. Good evening. And so far as Jaikant is concerned, it is also reported in 2019 SCC Online, Karnataka 1837.
Yes, sir. Thank
Okay,
you.
Mr. Good evening, Mr. Yeah, good evening, Mr. Shailesh.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, so you must be aware, of course, you know Kannada also, I can tell you. Attegondu kala, sosegondu kala. So that means the days have changed, especially in politics. Other day, Mr. Justice Sudhindra Rao rightly said, the days of humiliation has gone now. So arrest means there was a big humiliation. Now that's gone there, because when one party was in power, leader of the other side was sent to jail. Okay. And then when that person became a chief minister, this man has now been sent to jail. And after interrogation, when he comes, in fact, even Justice Santosh Hegde rightly observed that he is welcomed in the city of Bangalore with apple garlands, a big procession and all those things. So those days. Now, what I want to suggest in this regard, you have really made out a good point on Article 21. See, in civil law, for example, claims tribunal.
Yes.
When an accident takes place, courts gives a finding on 4 issues: whether there was an accident, who is responsible for the accident, what is the compensation to be paid, and who should pay that. On the same analogy, why can't the criminal law also be changed so that in every case, whether there is a claim or no claim, the magistrate should be made to give a finding as to what's the financial loss suffered by whether accused or the complainant.
In fact, sir, sorry. In fact, what I was, while preparing this on these lines only, what I was thinking is, after all, very often in the case of conviction, there is an order on sentencing. So in an acquittal, there can be an order on compensation as well.
That's it. Because see, take the case of N.D. Tiwari. After, at the last moment, he says, I admit the fathership. See, because why I'm saying that, there is a case of a village girl being raped and she becoming a pregnant. By the reason accused is the son of a village sarpanch. None of the villagers come before the court to give evidence. Naturally, he is acquitted. cannot the court on its own direct some DNA test and all those things and find out? They don't do that because the prosecution fails there. Because of the failure of the prosecution, the accused is let off. Should we pay him compensation also for committing the crime is my question.
No, so, more than a question, sir, I mean, you're absolutely right. This question, as Mahesh Thakur also pointed out, this question arises. Sometimes people are wrongly acquitted because of lack of evidence, because they have been able to tamper with evidence.
You're right.
So that is definitely one point of view which would have a lot of weightage, and which could be a dangerous consequence of providing compensation in all cases. But the other way of looking at it would be perhaps like, look, it is finally for the prosecution. If there has been a failure even in getting him convicted, it is a failure of the prosecution. That is one. Secondly, the via media to that, as I said earlier, perhaps could be that the burden of proving that a person who has been acquitted is not entitled to compensation could be that of the state, rather than laying the burden on the person who has been acquitted. Because as you said, there will be some people who are acquitted rightly, some people who are acquitted because of tricks played by them. But the burden could be on the state to establish that such and such a person is not entitled to compensation, rather than it being the other way around. Because, otherwise it would amount to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because if you say that in no case, there are a lot of poor people who would not be able to undergo the entire process of another litigation to establish that they're entitled to compensation.
Thank you, Shailesh.
After all, if you look at the acquittal rate, it's very high in India. So, obviously large number of people are being acquitted after having gone through the entire process.
Thank you, Mr. Shailesh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now I'll be unmuting Mr. Satyanarayan Gupta. Yes, sir, you are unmuted.
Sir, you are muted. I can't hear you.
No, sir, I have given him the option.
Okay. Thank you, Divikram.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Shailesh, wonderful. Today's topic is mostly on the criminal side. The advocate practicing on the civil side, like Mr. Harish, Mr. Puttiye, and other advocates. Please permit me to ask one question. You say miscarriage of justice. Miscarriage of justice is also in the civil side. There are a number of suits are filed, frivolous and unwanted litigations are filed. It will take 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Even a simple injunction suit is been dragged for several decades. Now, in the end, the court come to the conclusion, the plaintiff has produced a false evidence, plaintiff has produced a false document. After giving such finding, in the end they say parties to pay their own costs. Under section 35 and 35A of the CPC, the provision is made for injunction suit. The court fee, you are paying a nominal sum of 25 rupees. How much the advocate fees they granted after 10 years, 15 years, sometimes High Court, Supreme Court, all litigations are over. It will take 15, 20 years. I can't develop my property. Defendant cannot develop his property. Defendant cannot sell the property because people say there's a litigation. List pendants is there. Then who has to compensate? State is not going to compensate. Then the court should take very strict disciplinary procedure to compensate the successful party. That's my point. What's your take, sir?
No, I take your point, sir. I mean, except that the only distinction I can draw is that the consequence on the criminal side, normally, the consequence is much higher. I mean, it's after all, you're talking about a person's life or liberty. But otherwise, I take your point as a general, as a concept. I don't think anyone can have a quarrel with the proposition that if you are made to or put through the entire process of a trial, whether civil or criminal. And the entire process has been on account of claims which could never have been justified. Then you should be compensated. I mean, I can't disagree with you on that at all, sir. Except that the degree of damage done in a criminal side would, in a criminal investigation or prosecution was likely to be higher.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you, sir.
Yeah.
I agree.
But I can't have a quarrel with you on this proposition at all.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, costs is something, or costs, fines, damages, compensation granted in India are on the lower side across the board. So therefore, there is no dissuasion or there is no reason to dissuade an individual from filing a frivolous complaint or claim or suit or whatever.
In a civil suit, the time, talent, treasure, and health all will go. All will go.
I agree. I can't disagree with you on that.
Okay, okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I am unmuting Mr. Mallikarjun from Chitradurga. Yes, sir, you may ask your question.
Sir, good evening, Mr. Shailesh Kumar, sir.
Good evening, Mallikarjun. Good evening.
Yeah, very nice of you. Very good presentation. I would like to ask, so far as the wrongfully prosecuted in a case where so many 498A cases have been registered wrongfully, not only against the victim, not only filed a case against her husband, she's also filing against brothers, mother, everywhere. So many relatives have been involved. They are unnecessarily prosecuting before the court, before in the society. There are a lot of humiliation and embarrassment for them. Ultimately, court is acquitting them, saying that court never acquitted. I have come across judgments wherein I have never come across stating that it is wrongful case. Judge is acquitting on the basis of that the prosecution miserably failed to build home of the accused. So that no judge is giving a dicta saying that it is a wrongful case. When such being the case, whether the after an acquitter, the acquitted person should be go for a compensation in so far as the 498 cases. It is a large number of cases are there like this.
Yeah. In fact, if one were to give a typical example, 498A cases would be a typical example for the number of wrongful allegations that are made. But just to, supplement what you're saying, in Lalita Kumari's case, the Supreme Court, when it said that the police should not carry out a preliminary inquiry before registering an FIR, if I am not mistaken, in that case, the court made an exception and said that in matrimonial cases, you can look at it, and not only look at it, the court said that no arrest should be carried out. If I'm not mistaken, subject to correction, I don't offhand remember fully.
Sorry, you interrupted Lalita Kumari's case, yes.
Yeah, Lalita Kumari's case. So what the court said, that it should call the husband and wife for a session of mediation. So these days you find that that immediate threat of the husband being arrested is gone. If I remember right, this is what is said in that judgment. If you want, I can take a look at it right now, but this is what is said. But 498A, as you rightly said, it typifies cases where compensation ought to be granted. But why are we not able to make that claim? Because if you have to make that claim today, you have to file a civil suit. How many individuals will be willing to go through the process of that civil suit? As Puttigi Ramesh sir rightly observed, at the end of the case, if the court is coming to the conclusion that the person ought not to have been either convicted or ought not to have been arraigned as an accused, or that the prosecution has failed against him, the court must go into the question as to whether he is entitled to compensation. Today the law does not provide for it, but there should be a law which requires the court to do that. Today, if you have to claim compensation in 498 for a wrongful prosecution in 498A, you have two options. One, you file a civil suit. Second, you go to the High Court, file a writ petition and say that my right to liberty was violated on account of this prosecution or an arrest carried out pursuant to this complaint, and therefore I should be compensated. Neither of which are likely to succeed, for the reason that even in cases where compensation has been granted, the Supreme Court or High Courts have kept the threshold very high. They have said that it should be wrongful, malicious. I read out that Rajasthan judgment. They said that it's not malicious prosecution and therefore he's not entitled to compensation. I told you about that Akshardham case, where they said that the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that the prosecution was perverse, and still when an application for compensation was filed, of course it came to be withdrawn, but the Law Commission says that the exchange in court was that the court was not inclined to interfere, and therefore it came to be withdrawn. So today it is unlikely that you will succeed. I mean, in respect to the law that exists today. And that is why perhaps a statutory framework specifically for this is required.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In fact, the mediation or the preliminary inquiry has become more torturous than the arrest, because
Is
the
it?
police stations have turned out to be mediation centers, and they
That's
start
worse.
dictating terms, and apparently it's a tough task for the entire
But the
family.
benefit is the husband is not immediately running pillar to post thinking that he will be arrested tomorrow.
That's the only
That's-
protection.
That's the only protection.
Right. I think we have one more very relevant question by Mr. Keshav Murthy, but let me read it out. Fake shootout by police making a person to suffer whether the injured can seek compensation by invoking red jurisdiction.
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
So that I think would be an extreme sort of case where, again, I don't think anybody would have a quarrel with the proposition that a person would be entitled to seek. I mean, of course, it's a writ jurisdiction, it's discretionary. So a writ court may very well say that, no, you file a civil suit for compensation. But this would be one of the extreme cases, where if there is a case where compensation ought to be granted, this would be it. So yes, according to me, if you go by all these judgments, so many judgments, then the writ court ought to grant compensation. But as I pointed out, even the writ court or even the Supreme Court have taken very divergent views with this.
Right.
Sometimes the court has said that yes, compensation should be granted under Article 32 or 226. Sometimes the court has said that, look, you go file a civil suit. But again, I mean, so again comes back to this point that for state action that is violative of somebody's rights, there should be a framework to provide compensation.
Absolutely. I think we have one more question by Deepak Shetty. If High Court quashes the FIR by exercising power under Section 482 of Criminal Procedure Code, stating police has no power authority to file complaint, whether accused shall be compensated in such cases.
Okay. So what Deepak, I think, has not clarified is, would it be a case where a person has been taken into custody? Because
Correct.
that changes the complexion of the situation.
Correct.
Prosecution can be torturous as it is, but if a person has been taken into custody, it makes matters worse. Now,
I will try to unmute Deepak if I'm able to find him. Yes, Mr. Deepak, I have promoted you to the panel list and I'm unmuting you. You may kindly clarify. Yes, I have unmuted you. Mr. Deepak Shetty.
Yes, my question is, if he is arrested, am I audible?
yeah,
You are audible.
Deepak.
Please proceed.
I can hear you.
Yes. If a person is arrested, then police has registered a suo motu complaint where police has no authority to file such complaint, even under the MMRD Act and some other acts, then what is the remedy available to the accused? If he is not arrested for a false prosecution, what is the remedy available to the accused?
Remedy as the law exists today, the statutory remedy available to the accused is only to file a civil suit or to proceed against the person who has given information. That of course does not under CRPC, but that 358, that of course does not exist in this case because the police has so much taken cognizance. if he has been arrested, whether he has been arrested or not, the statutory remedy or the remedy under civil law is only this. The discretionary remedy available under writ jurisdiction may or may not be granted. And there, the jurisdiction of the High Court or the Supreme Court is very wide. In a case like this, for example, if somebody has undergone 1 day's detention or a couple of days, it's unlikely that the High Court or Supreme Court will grant compensation. Although in the Nambi Narayan case, which I referred to, the custody period was only 18 days. But massive compensation, I think 50 lakhs was granted by the Supreme Court to the petitioner in that case for having to undergo the process of prosecution and trial. So the answer again is, there is no statutory remedy. The civil law remedy would only be to file a civil suit. But if you are lucky, you file a writ petition, and if you are lucky, you might get compensation, but that's discretionary, which should not be the case. According to me, it should not be discretionary. There should be a legal framework within which court should operate. I can't hear you, Deepak. I can't hear you, Deepak.
Is there any remedy available in under CRPC? Just like victim compensation?
Yes, CRPC, the two provisions which I came across are 358, that is compensation to a person groundlessly arrested. Okay. And the second is 357 capital A, which is victim compensation scheme to be framed by the states. Okay. Now, the point is, in both of these, the person needs to first establish that he was wrongly, the word used is, he was groundlessly arrested. It's not that he was wrongly arrested or he has been acquitted later. He is groundlessly arrested. He needs to show that. And the target of this case would be the person who has given the information. Now the question is, would the state, a state authority, also be the subject matter to a case under 358? That is a question which begs the answer, because it doesn't appear to be so. As far as victims' compensation is concerned, 357 capital A, he will first need to prove that he is the victim of the offense. You follow?
Yes, sir.
Not only has he been acquitted, then he has to prove that an offense is committed by the person who has given information.
Yes.
Or by the prosecution. And only then he becomes a victim as defined under CRPC. And then he can claim compensation. So it's very long-winded. It is really not something which most people, unless he makes it an ego issue, a person in need of compensation is not going to go through this entire process. It's very unlikely.
Yes.
Thanks, Deepak. Right. Thank you so much. Any more questions before we wind up today's session? All right. Last question for the day by Mr. Harish. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shailesh, for giving us insight into all these parameters on victim compensation and wrongful arrest, false arrest, wrongful imprisonment, and wrongful conviction. These are rampant in our country. The most painful one is there are a lot of under trials languishing in the jails. Even they may be languishing in jails for a period exceeding in the prescribed period, for even if they had been convicted, perhaps they would have undergone a less sentence. So are they not victims? Why should there be such a high threshold benchmark for claiming a compensation? In one matter in Karnataka, if I remember, which I was reported, was on a mistaken identity. Somebody from Andhra was lying in our jail. Some 7 lakh compensation was given to him, and that was to be recovered from the jail staff and things like that. But he said, "You let me go first. I don't want any compensation." Okay. So when such is the case, the people under trials are the most victimized lot in this entire. 55% of the people languishing in jails are under trials. As if you go by the NCRB, National Crime Record Bureau, or statistics also. So, and how do you quantify in all these 3-4 categories, which I just now told: false arrest, wrongful imprisonment, and wrongful conviction? And as far as Satyanarayana Gupta's statement on civil law, see, loss of opportunity in a civil matter, going on for 30 years, I'm unable to dispose of my property, develop it, or even keep it, or even to protect it. During the course of the litigation is an Herculean task. I've seen people, the original litigants, both on plaintiff and defendant, both are no more. Their legal heirs have come on record, their legal heirs have come on record. And this is a huge, great loss of opportunity. And like in POCSO case and all, where victim compensation scheme has been announced by the government and things like that. But and as you said, the court hearing it should always, is in the end of the trial, should also announce the compensation, whether entitlement is there, whether it was a false case or whether it was just there was miscarriage of justice or not.
In fact, just to come back to the earlier point, as far as civil cases are concerned, a lawyer friend of mine from Bangalore itself was telling me that it had become rampant at one point of time to file a suit, get a temporary injunction, and then look to settle it. So yes, I mean, and as far as loss of opportunity is concerned, the Law Commission in fact says even in criminal cases that should be a benchmark, because the person after all has lost a substantial part of his life. But coming to the point of, sir, how to under trials, in fact, I came across, when I was researching for this itself, I came across a case where a person, after having served out a sentence, was not released for years together because he was not made aware of this. He just continued to languish over there. And the people who would suffer are people at the lowest economic strata in society, who would not have, the financial wherewithal to actually go ahead and take necessary legal steps. But the more difficult question is, what are the parameters with which you compensate? The parameters would necessarily be different in different cases. You mentioned various instances of wrongful detention. Now, if a person has been, in fact, I think in Germany, the law is that a person is entitled to compensation only if he has taken all steps to bring the evidence in his favor on record and it has not been brought, and yet he has been convicted. So perhaps that could be one parameter as to what steps the accused himself had taken. Another parameter, just like motor vehicles cases, there could be a multiplier as to what was his age, what would he have earned during that period of time, what is the loss of reputation. See, even in MACT cases, partly by statute, partly by judge-made law, parameters have been brought out. So there ought to be different parameters here also. In a case like this, where an under trial has been there for years together, the compensation should be very, very high. Because, I mean, there the state cannot escape its blame at all. As I had mentioned, some suggestive parameters by the Law Commission in its report, which according to me is wholly insufficient, is the loss of opportunity, the seriousness of the offense alleged, the period of detention. And so these are some of the parameters that the Law Commission had recommended. But I think a lot of this can also be taken care of if courts are more selective in refusing bail. Because all said and done, even today, partly because in India, again, I mean, it is impossible to trace a person. If he's out and decides to, it's very difficult to trace a person. But my own, this is not a very studied view, but my own view is, in fact, I had written about this in one of the newspapers. My own view is that with technology being what it is today, it can't be so difficult to keep track of an individual. So if that is done, this problem to a large extent would be sorted out, because he need not be in custody at all till he's either convicted, or if he's acquitted, then the question would not arise.
See, if I take an example of Aruna Shanbag's case,
yes.
See, in that the accused was acquitted, he was not traceable, he was found on a few days before this partial euthanasia was awarded. And see, no compensation to Aruna Shanbag. She was taken care of by the hospital staff from their salary to contribute. See the damage done to her life. the victim the accused went scot-free, he was acquitted, then he was not traceable after they followed him after the media report till Uttar Pradesh. The next day morning, before they could interview, he vanished.
Unfortunately, sir, this issue arises on both sides of the spectrum. It is one is the actual victim of the crime. The second is there are a large number of people who are wrongly prosecuted.
Correct. I'm saying both. This is Arvind and
Both sides. I mean, it exists both sides. The unfortunately, compensation, whether it is in civil law or otherwise, is very low.
That's true. Thank you, Shailesh.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sailesh. With this, we will have to end the session. My many thanks to you on behalf of Advocates Association Bengaluru for a very eloquent and enriching session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vikram. Thanks a lot. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shailesh.
So now we'll be ending today's session. Thank you.